to walk through some of these things, and we want to hear from our medical friends who are on the call, who may either want to speak up and explain what they've been doing, or wait till later to answer some questions. We took the plan to the board for first reading this past Monday. We've had lots of feedback. We shared the plan widely. Go ahead and advance to that second slide if you would. The second reading comes this following Monday. Just quickly, the sequence, we had engaged with you. We had lots of internal groups working. We published our plan a week ago, Wednesday. That was the same afternoon that Governor McMaster held a press conference and asked all school districts to bring all children back 5 days a week. There was a lot of emotional response to Governor McMaster's request from multiple perspectives, but the predominant voice was that the state simply isn't ready to do that yet. The following day after the governor's announcement, Superintendent Spearman met with all of the district superintendents, and then on Friday, the State Department issued a set of required guidelines for our restart plan. We included on this slide, because we shared it with lots of other groups, a picture, the most recent picture we had at the time of the DHEC heat map, just showing that Charleston is a hot spot. That's my language, not the medical professionals' language necessarily, but our COVID rate is too high. If we were to make this decision today, we could not start many, if any, students back in school. We are hoping still to get some more refined metrics, but we'll continue to monitor the situation. We won't start schools unless the medical professionals say that we can. My bias is that we have at least 90 different separate buildings. We have 6,000 employees. Some of them, under certain circumstances, are comfortable coming back to work. And we have many children who are highly vulnerable and need to come back to work. So regardless of what the decision is for the masses, for most children, if there's any way we could offer a few children an opportunity to come back as soon as possible after September 8th in person, we would like to try to do that. But before we could do that, we do need some more refined metrics. On the next slide, we share the required components of the state plan. We didn't have those the last time we talked with you, so just really quickly, if we could take a look. We're required to survey all parents to give them two choices, to ask them, do you want your child to come back in person when it's safe to do so, or do you want your child to be taught virtually? And if children are taught virtually, then we need to see them face-to-face before we begin the virtual instructions. If we're not able to bring all children back, we need to build in a time frame that says how frequently we will revisit the metrics to make a decision based on the conditions at the time. So we have said we would do that every 30 days or every month, so that gives two-week cycles of data to look at, and that so monthly we would make a new determination regarding how many, if any, children could come back to school. The State Department requires that we really ramp up the quality of any virtual instruction that we provided last spring. That is a no-brainer for us. Carolyn Belcher and her team have been working since spring to make sure that we are in a much better place to do that, much more structured with schedules and dependable delivery times, making sure our children have greater accessibility. We still can't get access to 100% of our children no matter what we do, so that's a concern about a remote start. And then the last requirement is a legislative requirement that at least for the 4K kindergarten through 8th graders, that we put 5 extra days at the beginning of the school year to bring children back in small groups to assess where they are and determine how to serve them best as we move forward. These are called LEAP days: learn, evaluate, analyze, and prepare. So we're required to build that in. So on the next slide, we summarize for you how we'll start. Our goal will remain to serve as many students as we possibly can in person as the conditions permit. We want to give our parents choice, and as I said, next week we'll be sending out that enrollment option. Which do you want? Are you interested in person when it's safe, or would you just prefer to start virtually for at least 9 weeks at a time? And that will be a separate virtual school that has high quality instructional options with a carefully constructed, tested curriculum in it. We are going to continue to follow the advice of medical experts. And if we can open safely with any small number of students. I mentioned we have 90 buildings. If we could bring one child back per building, that would be 90 children we could serve. If we could bring 5 children back per building, that would be 450 children we could serve. So we're not talking about huge numbers, but if it's safe to open for some children under any condition, we want to start to do that. We successfully ran a daycare program with a small number of children for Roper Hospital all spring long at Meminger. We did not have a COVID positive case until the 1st of July, and that was one of the adults, with no certainty that the infection was caused by being at Meminger Elementary. So we think we know how to do this, but we can't do it without 3 things coming together: parents who want their children there, teachers who feel comfortable being there once they've seen the safe guidelines, and medical professionals who take a look at that specific situation and say, this appears to be as safe as we can possibly make it. So our next steps, just to quickly recap for everyone, we've met with several groups this week, and we'll give you an opportunity to give us some feedback before we take our final recommendations to the board Monday. Immediately following the board's approval, we'll be doing that parent survey. We will also survey our teachers to see what their preferences are, what their feelings are. Some are very, very afraid to come back in schools. They're at the Maslow's lowest level, not feeling comfortable, and it would not be wise to try to ask them to come back under any conditions until their comfort level is at a higher place. So that's a lot of work to do. We have to figure out how many of the children who, when we eventually return, want to ride the bus. We'll have to have bus passes because we can't put all the children on the bus who show up at the stop if they haven't registered. On August 11th to the 17th, we'll do the teacher professional development days so that they have access and understand how to use the new learning platforms that we've put in place for the times we have to deliver remotely. Then between August 18th and the 28th, we have a chance to analyze all the data we have coming in and do the matchups. So we will have primarily 2 groups of parents: those who want virtual, who want to enroll in our full-time virtual academy for longer term until conditions improve. And if they enroll in the virtual academy, they will have a chance to opt out at the end of every grading period. So kindergarten through the 8th grade, if you're in the virtual academy, you can get out at the end of the first 9 weeks. If you're taking a high school course, that course doesn't finish till the end of the semester. So you would be committing to the K-12 virtual academy for a whole semester if you're taking a high school course. For the rest of our parents, they're saying at some point we want in person, and we understand that we may be on a temporary remote schedule until it's safe to reopen school, begin reopening, staggering in the scheduled reopening of schools. August 31st to September 4th, we'll use as those 5 days that we need to bring our K-8 children in. We'll bring them in a few at a time. Teachers who want to come to work that week will be paid by the legislature to come to work. Those are extra employment days for them. If they do not feel comfortable coming to work, there's no pressure for them to come. They simply won't receive the extra pay. So those are extra employment days. Doesn't harm their contract at all if they choose not to come to work. Our recommendation is that September 8th is the first day of school and that we start for everyone on September 8th in whatever mode appears to be safest and best for everyone at that time. We talk weekly with the superintendents in Horry, Georgetown, Berkeley, Dorchester, both Dorchester districts, Colleton, and Beaufort. So of all of those districts at this time, all but Berkeley are also planning for the September 8th start date. So that's just a very quick run through. One more time, we want to look at the achievement loss slide and emphasize what happens when we look at, this is from the Brookings Institute, the citation is on the slide. If we look at when schools closed, the children who were in the top quartile at the 75th percentile actually gained a little between the school close and the end of the school year, and they usually continue to gain some over the summer. Those who are at the bottom fourth in the 25th percentile have learning loss when they're not in school, and that's exacerbated by the extended close over and the time off over the summer. So when we do start back, our teachers are going to have a particularly difficult challenge with the learning gap having grown quite a bit. So it means that we're going to have to think very differently about how to group children. Carolyn Belcher talks a lot about grouping children, making sure they get the skills they missed, and then accelerating to try to catch up to address the grade level skills without ignoring the gaps in learning that children come to us with. Jeff Baroe can quickly again review the operational safety slide, and then we want to take time for our medical friends who are on the phone with us to comment, tell us where they are in their thinking, any work that they may have done, any availability they have to address questions from this group. Then we're turning to 3 discussion questions that we would like to spend the remainder of the time getting your feedback on. So Jeff?
Yes, ma'am. Not much has changed on this slide as far as information goes, so I won't go through every single bullet, but provide a couple of updates. On the second bullet related to facilities, the divider project is well underway. We've completed installation at 3 schools, and we're doing the analysis and layout of schools at the middle school level, hoping to get to high schools next week. So that would put us in a position that in a scenario where based on the COVID data in the area, we can bring as many children possible back into the school. Obviously, if the conditions don't exist, the dividers are there and we have less kids in the school. I've gotten a lot of questions from a lot of faculty members and parents about the air conditioning systems. A number of them have done some research and looked at reports, and there's a GAO study that says 54% of the schools have failing HVAC systems, and we are nowhere near that. We did a complete analysis in the summer and feel very confident in our systems and have done a number of things to ensure those are operating at peak condition. From a bus perspective, we are very, very close to sharing a plan. I saw it for the first time yesterday. I need to look at it a little bit harder and get it to our senior leaders, in which by changing some bell times, either earlier or later in our current tiers, there's a possibility that we can do additional runs to schools in order to get all of the kids to school based on the numbers from last year and operating at a 50% capacity. So some real promising news toward bus transportation. No changes on nutrition services or the COVID protocol. And I'll close with the fact that all of our solutions will be in alignment with the MUSC Back to School Playbook. That is very, very close to being published. There's some very good information in that. MUSC has been to a number of our schools and has put the draft document together, and we hope to have that very, very soon.
Thank you, Jeff. Ellen, so we are ready. That's great, Maggie. Go ahead and advance the slide. We have 3 discussion questions for you, and that's the remainder of our agenda today, but we wanted to pause before we started the discussion. Ellen, I want to turn it over to you to introduce any of the medical experts who may have been able to join this call today and give them an opportunity to explain what they've been doing, uh, illuminate their thinking, and respond to questions that participants in this morning's call may have.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Postaway. So my name is Ellen Nitz. I'm the Director of Nursing for CCSD. We have joined with us today some members of our MUSC Back to Business plan. These guys, this staff has done a fantastic job really gathering information for us, listening to some of our concerns, and really trying to find solutions for how we are going to re-enter school safely, not only for our students, for our task as well. For our staff as well. So today, Dr. Ed O'Brien has, I think, been delayed. I'm not sure if he's joined us yet or not, but we also have two of our liaisons that are working with us very closely on Back to Business, both Tara and Heather. Are y'all on?
Hi, this is Tara. I'm on.
Oh, perfect. So Tara, would you like? Great. Would you like to give a quick update or a brief overview summary of the Back to Business plan?
Sure, I can do that. So like she said, I'm Tara Torres. I'm part of a 3-man team that got the pleasure to tour the schools, and along with Regina and Heather. And we are managing liaisons for Back to Business. And we were able to tour the schools, and we were very impressed with what has already been done. And our goal, and everybody was very helpful and asked a lot of great questions. And our goal was to incorporate a lot of what was already been done and to give our best practice guidelines along with risk mitigation strategies. So that's what we tried to incorporate with every space in the school. Are there any questions about what we had done?
And just to kind of go a little bit further in depth from what Tara said, like she had said, they went through every space. So we have everything from specifications of safety guidelines from the front office staff all the way through classrooms, cafeteria, bathrooms, gym area, recess. So they really had a comprehensive overview of what best practice for safety standards would be in each situation.
And I'll add on to that. My name's Heather Tepner. I'm also part of the Back to Business Liaison team. And I was the third representative from the team. And just want to further reinforce that, all our recommendations and risk mitigation strategies are founded in evidence. So we do look at the CDC, we look at what DHEC is mandating, we look at the American Academy of Pediatrics. So, all of this information is researchable that we have provided in our playbook. And we have diligent higher level medical directors who look over the information with a fine-tooth comb. We have a team of experts through MUSC, which we're very fortunate to have that resource. And we look through line by line to ensure that nothing is outside of evidence-based practice.
Thank you for that. Just so that everyone on the call, I think probably everyone knows this, but the only metrics that we have to use are the metrics that DHEC published. And when DHEC announced those metrics, they explained that they had contacted 49 other states, and no state yet had set up metrics to use for when schools might reopen. And so South Carolina was the first to take a stab at this, and they used 3 criterion. They looked at the incidence rate per 100,000 people in the population of a particular area. They looked at the trend in the infection rate. So is the trend going down over time or going up over time, and suggested, I believe, that we have a downward trend for at least 14 days. And they also looked at the number of positive tests, the percentage of positive tests, assuming that the number of tests tests given is adequate or for the conditions at the time. So when on those 3 criteria, Charleston is high. We have a high incident rate per 100,000. We have been high because our rates were increasing daily. They went down a little bit. I haven't looked the last couple of days. Folks on this call will know. And then our rate of infection per the number of people being tested is also about twice as high, has been running about twice as high as is recommended by DHEC. So DHEC looked at those 3 criterion, and they said, here's what we consider to be high, here's what we consider to be medium, here's what we consider to be low. So nothing over an infection rate in testing, anything over 10% is considered too high to open schools. And we were running over 20%. I'm not sure if that's dropped significantly, so I'll pause for a moment. If that's the case, I wouldn't want to leave the wrong impression. I think we're still running pretty high. So we're running about twice what the rate that we need to have in order to fit DHEC's description of what constitutes a high infection rate. Then parallel to that, but not directly connected to it, Accelerate Ed issued a report that said that DHEC should establish some criteria. And if a district was rated high, the district should open only in virtual mode. If a district was rated medium, then the district could open in some sort of blended mode. And if a district was rated low, then the district should consider reopening schools. So the 2 things weren't established together exactly, but those are the only metrics we have. And given those metrics, if we go only by those metrics, it would be a long time before we could reopen our doors, period. So what we had asked MUSC to do, and that's what Dr. Sweat was going to try to help with, was to develop some more finely tuned metrics that look at a particular community or a particular group of children who might need or want to come back to school, as well as the teachers who might be willing to come and teach those children. See if we could set up the testing protocols or whatever would be required to create that and incubate that particular site for a safe restart. And so when you hear us talk about needing more granular metrics, that's what we're talking about. But in the meantime, the folks at MUSC have really been overwhelmed with the amount of work that needs to be done. They're a state agency and they have lots of organizations they have to serve, and we simply haven't been able to get to those metrics as quickly as we'd hoped. But the playbook, the Back to Business, which they've converted to a Back to School playbook, has been immensely helpful in helping us assure that we have what we would consider the 5-star gold seal for creating the kinds of environments that would be safe for reopening. So the first discussion question centers around, you probably had time to read it on your screen. The board gave first approval to the restart plan, setting September 8th as the reopening date. We might offer a temporary option of starting back on September 8th with remote learning. Unless there's some miraculous fall off, in the infection rates in our area in the next 3 weeks, that's what we'll have to do for the majority of our children whose parents want them to start back in person. When we start back in some schools, we won't have the capacity to bring all the children back who want to come back. So Carolyn, do you want to talk a little bit about the AABB schedule that was proposed, when it's safe to bring children back in the schools where we don't have enough capacity to safely bring all the children back?
Hey, Dr. Postlewaite, just before passing it along, can I just add something to the numbers real quick?
Please.
So just as a data point, we do track internally based on the data provided from DHEC. We tracked a 7-day average in Charleston. And I'm looking at the data here. We peaked on a 7-day average in Charleston on July 13th, and we're down to 211 now. That's the number of new cases in a 7-day period. So the number has steadily dropped from July 13th to the 22nd, which was 2 days ago. So it's promising that it does appear to not be rising and actually going down.
Thanks, Jeff. I think it would be helpful for the board and public on Monday to have a little chart that they could see that shows whatever data that we have that aligns with the DHEC data, so we could see what the trends look like. If you and your staff have an opportunity to put that together.
Yep.
I do think that visual would be really helpful. We'll also have in Monday's slides what the DHEC metrics are, because we didn't display that publicly before, and I think it would be helpful for people to see that. So Carolyn, you want to say just a word about, I think we talked about it with this group before, but if you could just remind us all about the AABB.
We did. We talked through some of the options last time around alternating weeks, alternating days, or alternating double days, AABB. And I think we would all agree that none of these options are ideal. There was a slight preference that I heard when we met last time that it's a little easier for parents if there's a longer period of time to find childcare, so that it's easier to say to someone, I'm looking for childcare from Monday through Wednesday or Wednesday through Friday versus every other day. Though recognizing that every other day does mean that we have a longer ones before seeing a teacher in person. The reason why this is a good instructional choice too is as we're starting to see other districts come out in front, the AABB means that if I'm a student in the A group, I'm going to school on Monday and Tuesday for in-person instruction. At the end of Tuesday, that gives the teacher a chance to have the child download any assignments, get any written packets, and have instructions for what would happen on at-home or virtual instruction for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. If we did an alternating day, we'd have to do that each day, which would take away from the in-person instructional time. And then obviously, if you're in the B group, that stepping back and getting ready for at-home or virtual instruction would happen Friday afternoon. Our plan, just to make sure that we're getting the systems and safety procedures up and running safely, is if we are able to open in person, we will have Wednesday without large groups of students. We may have small groups of students come in for testing or IEP meetings or other things. But that would be a faculty work day to make sure that we're getting ready for virtual instruction, at-home instruction. Once we think we've got it, the children know the routines, the adults know the routines. Likely around 4 weeks in, we would transfer to an, I'm trying to get this right, AABB for week 1, and then AABBB for week 2.
Thank you, Carolyn. We know that is still a nightmare of childcare arrangements for parents, but based on feedback that the parents on this call gave us, we knew that was better than an every other day sort of situation. So that's where we are. The virtual academy opens full-time September 8th. And then, as I said, if you enroll in that particular option, that's a 9-week commitment for K through 8 and a semester commitment for students taking high school courses. So we wanted to open up the question, does this seem like the most reasonable approach given the conditions in which we find ourselves? Or do you have some ideas about what might constitute a wiser and more useful, more responsive way to start? The one qualifier I will put in here, and I may be the last holdout on this, but we do have children who desperately need to be back in school. If there's any way that our medical friends say that it is safe to bring a few of those children in, and our teachers take a look at the situation and are willing to come in so that they feel very comfortable, we would like to be able to bring a few children in person. That won't apply to the 50,000 children, but there are some who are extremely in need of in-person services just as quickly as we can get it to them. So your time now to give us some feedback on your feelings about the start date.
Hey, this is Paul. I actually had a quick question for Ellen and Jeff and whomever else is appropriate. You guys might have mentioned this on the last slide, but have you guys shared yet the timeline to do the local school assessments, to have those all complete in terms of sort of putting schools into the categories of notwithstanding all the kind of trends in the incident rates, but once students are able to get back into the schools, whether those schools will qualify for 100% versus the AABB? Both, when will that be complete? And then I think it would be helpful to, I still haven't heard anything from my local school. I know others are in that same position. There may be some that are hearing more, but I think to the extent that, one, we can start to communicate when those assessments will be done, and then two, start to get that info out there, both kind of at a system level, but also at a local level, from local school leaders to parents to teachers to staff. I think that'd be super helpful.
So we have not put out numbers to any school yet. And the challenge is the concern of it being incomplete because we don't have the busing capability yet. So we'd hate to have false hope that for somebody that says, boy, I sure hope we can bring all the kids back. And then we only find out we can only bring half you back because of the buses. So it's something we've been trying to keep both of them moving at the same time. I'm optimistic that, and the other aspect was we didn't want to put schools out individually yet because of the very same reason. If we adjust buses to move in either direction, it could affect one that might have already been put out, information that had already been put out. But I completely understand the need to want to know that as a parent before making that decision. And I'm hopeful that by the end of next week, we'll have gone through the last of the middle schools and the high schools. When we get off the line, I'll talk to Dr. Postlethwaite about the possibility of releasing the elementary school information, which with busing is the most separate and distinct from middle and high school because they operate on two different tiers. So we'll work to try to put that out.
Thank you.
And
And
Paul, if I may add, another aspect of that is that this is ever-changing information. So we don't have control of COVID. If we had control, no one in the world would be in the situation we're in right now. So even though we put out information, it's going to be extremely important for everyone to realize that we have to move as COVID moves. And that could be in an upward trend or a downward trend. And we're going to have to learn to adapt. And if we don't do a good job of that, we won't be able to stay in school. But if we're able to flow with COVID and meet the criteria where we can keep our students and staff straight, the better off we'll be. But that means, it means that it's complicated for our families, just bottom line.
Yeah, thank you for that, both y'all. And I'll just one last comment, then I'll go back on mute, I promise. Is just that I think even just what you shared just now is super helpful. So again, even if there's not a clear decision yet, I think like, the communications we've seen even in the last week, I think have been really beneficial. Here's what we know now. Here's the sort of risks and benefits we're weighing. Here are the decisions we're trying to figure out. Even that I think is just so helpful in terms of sort of lowering the temperature a little bit across the community, helping people feel a little bit more at ease. And also just in terms of kind of getting people ready for the change and enrolling them, kind of making them full participants in this change. Like you said, we're all in this together. It's going to be hard. We're all going to have to adapt. There's going to be a ton of change. We're just going to all have to work through together imperfectly. I think just continuing to reiterate that message over and over and over again at all levels through all mediums will just continue to be so helpful to everybody.
Well, it's the message, and just to piggyback onto what Ellen said about the caveats and the asterisks, the other challenge related to communication is if we put out a number of a particular school and say that with the COVID protocol that we've established, we could bring every kid back, as to Ellen's point, it doesn't necessarily mean we will right away. And so we've got to be very cautious that we could say a school we can accept all the kids, but as of 8 September, we still might be hybrid because of the COVID conditions that we're facing in some form or fashion. So it's just, I guess it's the best case scenario for the parent to know that if we feel comfortable enough to bring every kid back, still under COVID protection protocols, we can fit all the kids in the school, and we'll move toward that, and have the ability to move toward that. So.
This is Kate. I want to add on to what Paul said and address the discussion question. I do think it's reasonable and a responsible way for us to go back on September 8th, virtual as needed. I think you all have come up with what, we've got to go by DHEC metrics and whatever else you all can come up with. I think bringing small groups back of the neediest kids is something we definitely should do. But one thing I think I'd like to see, just based on the feedback that I've gotten, and I hate to create more work for you guys, but I agree with Paul in that I think we need some kind of communication from the schools to parents. And it even can be something that, everybody's getting the same thing, but it's coming from schools. And we don't have to commit in this very first communication to how many kids are coming back. I just think when I look at all the emails we're getting, and I know what I know from being on these calls, you guys are so far ahead of things. And I think parents just need to hear, even you could send a communication and link all of these meetings that we've had. If people watch those, they'll I think just be more confident. I had a parent call me yesterday and suggest, could we do a virtual tour of the schools before parents decide, whether they're going to send their kids virtually or back to school. And I said, oh God, that's a heck of a lot of work. This person volunteered to help. And I don't know that that's what we need to do, but I think this, even if we're not saying X number of kids are coming back, we're saying, this is what we're working on. We're going to let you know as soon as possible. We know everything is changing, but just letting the parents know the work that y'all are doing. So that's just my thought. I'm on mute.
Thank you. Thank you. And Paul, Mr. Asper, while you're, perhaps if you could unmute and explain to people what you do. And I just want to acknowledge that Mr. Asper has been extraordinarily helpful in urging us to communicate what we know when we know it. And he's also offered to help to the extent that he can with trying to think about these more granular metrics or data points that would give comfort to teachers and students and give us some way to guide scientifically the decisions we're making. So Mr. Asper, if you could just say a word about what you do and your willingness to help, I think that would be comforting for people on this call.
Sure, thank you. The major caveat before everything that I say is that I am I shared with Dr. Postlewaite and a few others that I'm not a scientist or a clinician by training, so I would not ever say that I'm equipped to sort of do the heavy scientific lifting. I'm not a scientific expert, and I would hope that the district and the leadership team, like y'all are doing, would continue to look to folks like Ms. Nitz and Dr. Richardson and the real medical experts at MUSC and elsewhere, in terms of sort of being the real like North Star around a lot of this stuff. But what I did share with them is that I do have a relatively deep amount of experience professionally in both analytics and then sort of turning. One of the things I think that we do have a potential opportunity to do, which Dr. Postlewaite, I actually appreciate. I think you started to do a little bit more of this even earlier on the call, is just help people understand what are the metrics or other sort of guidelines that the district is using to make some of these decisions. So to me, that looks like just talking about over and over again those three kind of components of the metrics that Dr. Postlewaite listed: the 2-week incident rate and trend in incident rate, the 2-week % positive rate, kind of help people understand what those mean and how their individual actions and our community's actions can impact those. Where are we now and where do we want to go in order to feel safe, either at a system level or at a local level, to get students and teachers and staff back into schools? And is there a way potentially to, like was mentioned several times, to do it in a more targeted way versus sort of a blanket approach across the entire county? So we'll just close by saying I offered my services purely in the spirit of, if they could be helpful, I'm happy to jump in, and with an incredible amount of just humility around the idea that, again, I'm not a scientist, and I would not I would encourage everyone to continue doing what we're doing, which is looking to folks like Dr. Richardson and MUSC and others for the real scientific guidance.
Thank you very much. Ellen, has Dr. O'Brien been able to join us yet?
I am not aware if he has been or not. Dr. O'Brien, are you on by chance?
Ellen, if you could just sort of monitor the participants in case.
I will.
Thank you. Thank you. I know it was his intent to join, but we all have a lot of empathy for what we can only imagine things are like for our medical community right now. We have a couple minutes left for discussion of this slide about the start date. If anyone else would like to chime in, and if not, we'll move to the next discussion, which is about parent options. So
Dr. Postlewaite, could I interrupt for just a minute?
Please, Jamie.
I just wanted to speak to Paul and Kate and what your questions were about parent communication and being a building leader. Something that I'm in the process of planning right now is a Zoom meeting for parents to give them the opportunity to just have clear communication, because sometimes, it can be confusing. So I'm going to have a Q&A session with my parents, working right now, coordinating with my bilingual secretary to offer it in English and Spanish. So just know that building leaders are thinking that way and want to be able to offer those opportunities for parents before they need to make a decision.
Thank you, Jamie. And to be fair to our principals, I think it wasn't, we asked them to hold back on issuing much until after our board voted, because we're always leery of getting out ahead of our board particularly in situations such as this one, where our circumstances change so quickly, and the guidance, and this isn't a criticism, but the guidance as people learn more changes because they were getting smarter about how best to respond. Any other contributions on the start date discussion?
I do. This is Amy Bramble here, fifth grade teacher. And I just wanted to say, I understand the September 8th start date because I feel like we do have so much to happen before then. And especially deciding and having parents decide if their children are going to go back virtually or not. And I think parents and teachers are getting a survey after the board meeting Monday. And I was wondering how long they had to fill out that survey and complete it to turn it in, because I think the parents and teachers should have two things prior to submitting that. One is if they can get a list or access to the best practices that were talked about. I think Ms. Nitz went through the schools and stuff so that parents and teachers know exactly the protocols and guidelines and the safety measures that are in place so that they have a full understanding if their students do go back face to face. It could change their opinion. And then also you've already discussed the AABB option. Is it possible to say for schools, if we have all students come back, this would be an AABB school? And then again, as you noted, things are always changing. And so if some of those students were to go virtually, perhaps they could be a 100% school with the students that are remaining. So just identifying the schools in general, if they have all the students that are registered there to come back, they would be an AAB school. But if things were to change, they could go 100%. I think that parents and teachers would just need those two things before filling out those surveys.
Thank you, Amy. That was great feedback. And to answer your question, we were hoping to get the surveys, the bulk of the surveys back within 1 week. That's why you heard Jeff say that by the end of next week, he hopes to have that list out of the capacities of each school. Carolyn and her team are working on how to word that survey to give people information that they need, make it simple, but with the ability to get to look behind for more information. And Reverend Mack had asked me last week or the week before to get started on the video of the virtual tour, what it looks like from the time a child gets on the bus, coming to school, going through the routines at school and so forth. So someone is working on one video, not one for every school, but a video now. But those are excellent points. We need to make sure we have the syncopation of those things so that we're not asking the surveys to be returned before teachers and parents have that kind of information. That's extraordinarily helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else on start date discussion? Let's move on then to how we want to think about the parent options. So we've talked about this already. We want to make the actual survey form itself pretty simple, but behind it, there would be more explanation for the parents who want to look at exactly what am I signing up for here. So that the enrollment options, Carolyn, I think you're probably the better person to talk about these.
I don't know.
I'm sorry. Carolyn, are you talking and muted or?
No, I thought someone had a question. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm good to go. So on enrollment options. So, with respect to what we were just discussing, so we understand that parents need to understand the capacity of the building, but essentially when we send out the enrollment form, the headline would be that my preference is that my child would return to in-person instruction. And then the clarity would be whether it's an AABB or we're able to offer for the week. And if under that, we're also going to be clear that if the virus levels in the system are not lowered, we would prefer a remote at the school 100% online learning experience temporarily, and then the virtual academy. I think one of the things we're worried about from our perspective is the virtual academy is intended for those families that almost from the beginning of this process that going back to school was not the right fit for them. They have medically vulnerable folks in their family. They are homeschooling was working for their child, and they'd rather wait a full year before they think about going back again. Now, because the virus levels have shifted in not the right direction, although I'm happy to hear that we're getting some promising news. Please wear your masks. Please wear your masks. I want to make sure that we recognize that we're not going to open until we know that we actually can. So we want to say to parents, like, we get it. You want your child's teacher to be the one who's working with your child at 100% virtual, but as soon as we open in person, you would be up. So that's the goal, is to try to get that distinction so we understand where parents' priorities are.
So our question is, as you think about this morning, do these seem like the best options? Or do they, if we explain them, do they seem clear enough? I either feel comfortable with my child coming back to school at some point this year, when as soon as possible, as soon as the medical professionals say that they believe the conditions are safe and the way we've worked on the schedule and the movement about the building is safe. Or, as Carolyn said, I'm just not ready at all to contemplate sending my child back into a building with others. And I really want the more high octane, I don't know if that word's even environmentally correct anymore, but high energy, high caffeine level, fully caffeinated on school approach. So does that seem like the right choice, so that we can begin sorting and matching our desire for those who want to come back to school as quickly as possible, is to match those children with the teacher that they will have when they come back to school, so that there's the least disruption possible if we have to start out in a temporary remote mode. So what ideas do you have that might help us get this fine-tuned for parents?
Amy Bramble here again. I'm sorry to have another question, but just in terms for parents and planning, you say that the students can switch on and off at elementary level at the 9 weeks. And I was wondering, with starting school on September 8th, would the 9 weeks in the calendar that is written now be pushed back a couple weeks? Because, you know, if a parent is going to do childcare, pay for services, they need to know, you know, if they can switch on and off.
That's a really good question. What we're bringing to the board Monday is not a revision of the entire calendar. It's a recommendation to start September 8th. We need to get clarification from the state officials about what leeway we will have now that Charleston County has been approved as an e-learning district. Might we use some of the days that are currently scheduled for teacher work days as also student instruction days with the e-learning option, and the way that students will be able to download work on their devices, and then they don't actually have to be online to complete that work at home. If we could do something like that, it will allow us to make up some days during the year and not push so far into June. But to answer your question directly, the end of the first 9 weeks will have to be different than it appears in our current calendar, because there is no way to make up all of those days in the first 9 weeks. So it would have to be pushed forward a little bit.
Excellent. Yeah, that makes sense. I just think that parents, in terms of paying for childcare, might need to know that.
Good point. Thank you. We've had a lot of questions about childcare. In fact, parents have and some private and other public entities have reached out to say, if you don't open schools, could you provide childcare? And so we honestly believe we could, but contradictory to say that we can't open our schools to teach children, but we could open our schools to provide childcare. So we know childcare is huge for folks. If we're able to open our schools, we do have a division that's interested in exploring whether there are facilities that would be available for paid childcare options when kids are on the off day. So that has nothing to do with this parental option discussion, but just to let you know some of the intensive and extensive work that's going on right now. Again, we have no idea if we could pull that off, but we know it's a critical need for folks. Back to the survey. Thank you, Amy. Any other questions about the survey? Suggestions about?
Yeah, and this is Mary Carmichael at Charleston Math and Science, but coming from a parent perspective as well. One of the things that I think parents do want to hear on their own personal school level is understanding, and I think it's going to be a heavier lift. I understand there's lots of moving pieces to this, but they want to know in elementary, is my child going to be in this safe cohort or pod or whatever we're going to call it within an elementary school? In middle school, is my child's school able to have my child stay in one place even if the teachers are floating, and what is that going to look like? And then they want to know what high school looks like. They really are at the point where to make this next decision, they really want to know that. But I understand from the school planning side and the administrative side that some of that is unknown until we know how many teachers are going to opt to tell us that they've got either a child care issue or a medical issue and they cannot be in the building at that time when we can have kids safely in the building, or do so many parents decide that they want a virtual option that it changes what you can and can't do within the building. So it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg situation, but I do think we need to at least give families an idea of what is going to be going on at the school that their child's enrolled at, so that they know a little bit more about what their option is going to look like. It's very abstract to them right now, and that if they're already scared, that's adding to their concerns.
Thank you, Mary. I've made note that information needs to be in the survey. We know that at the elementary level, and I believe Jeff has and Carolyn have, this is in written guidance to principals just recently, that at the elementary level, we believe we can hold children in cohort groups and teachers would rotate rather than moving the children. It becomes a little more difficult at the middle school level if we want to avoid tracking students at a certain level of achievement and not having them mingle with peers who may be achieving at a different level, but who have a lot to offer by way of analytical thinking. They just don't happen to have the same level of math skills that we typically organize children to teach around at the middle and often at the high school level. So we get your question. We think we have a good solution at the elementary level. It's going to take a lot more work to figure that out at the middle and high school levels. But your point is, we need to have as much information as possible for parents before we ask them to respond. So did I take your point correctly? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good points. Anything else about the parent options, the kind of information that needs to go with the survey?
I do have a question. This is Willa Hobbs, master reading teacher. If we had to go to a remote temporary learning situation for September the 8th, when would that decision be made? And how much time would parents have to prepare for that?
So the latest possible date to make that decision would be August 19th. We have a lot of feedback and frankly some pressure to make that call on Monday so that people can plan. So we have a lot of work to do between now and Monday. I am probably the person who is most reluctant to make that call now. I am still really hopeful that the rates will continue to fall in a way that would allow us to offer some children an opportunity to come back. For example, no matter what people do to provide Wi-Fi and broadband access and free service, we have children without electricity. No matter what we do to provide virtual supports, we have young children who need the kind of support they get from their teachers, because early interventions prevent greater loss as they grow older. So for the children who very clearly critically need us, I am very reluctant to close in on a one-size-fits-all solution, but we know we need to make that decision before August 19th. August 19th is the latest date we could make that call, but we know that parents need to know by the end of July, or certainly by August 10th or so. That's why getting these surveys out and back is so critical to us, so that we can figure out, not just from parents, but from teachers, what their comfort level is. Did I address the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Other thoughts, suggestions for improvement on making sure that we provide enough information to parents about the options that they can make informed choices, knowing that before September 8th, they may choose another option, and we will accommodate that if we have the capacity to do that.
I have a quick question. Chad Williams, 8th grade math teacher at Deer Park Middle.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess this stems from something that Paul said and what we just talked about with the elementary. Are there going to be options to say, like, okay, if the elementary students are probably the hardest for the parents to manage, and they also have the ability to be the safest in pods, is there going to be options where we possibly put them back in school first and see what happens with the data, if the cases rise or if the cases stay where they are, and if it's working, before we start opening up the older grades?
That's exactly the kind of thinking that we are engaging in. We don't have specific plans, but once we get those surveys back, we'll know which parents are open to thinking about bringing their children back. And we agree that elementary children, and particularly those who are learning to read, learning language skills, need to be in school, given priority, along with a few other groups of children. But we've not done the detailed work on that because we don't have enough information yet. But that's precisely the kind of thinking that goes into our discussions right now. Thank you for that, Chad.
Well, thank you.
Anything else that comes to mind regarding parent options and the kind of information that parents will need? All right, we're going to move on then to the next discussion question, which has to do with the factors impacting the plan. So we have to strike a balance as we're thinking about reopening schools. We have to think about the health and safety metrics. We have to think about the capacity of our schools, not just, as Jeff has said, what we know we could do in optimal conditions, but what would the capacities be in opening safely at a comfort level for teachers and restoring parent confidence. So we have to think about the capacities that we would recommend, regardless of what the analytics show about the number of students that could optimally fit in the school. We need to know how many teachers are feeling comfortable once they've had an opportunity to visit the school and see what's in place. We need to know, I've mentioned the confidence level generally, because we don't want a bunch of fits and starts with our children if we can avoid it. And then we have to take into consideration the changing state requirements. They seem to be pretty stable right now, But as conditions change, our leaders have a responsibility to adjust accordingly. So those are the factors we're thinking about that we have to consider together. That's part of the massive complexity in the decision making. Can you think of other factors that we're not building into this that should be taken into consideration? Are there aspects of these factors that you want to make sure we're looking at in enough detail, or can you think of other impacts? For example, we know that a hurricane this fall throws everything off and creates another massive challenge for our community, but we're not building that into our thinking. We're trying to think otherwise, best case scenario, how do we stay on track as we're putting the factors into the decision-making process. So what are your thoughts about this? Are we worrying about everything we need to worry about?
Dr. Polsmake, Chad Williams again. So my biggest concern is if a teacher contracts it, and are we going to be able to get subs in? Like, I mean, are we going to have contingencies where other teachers try to fill those gaps? Because if a teacher becomes very sick, you know, it's going to become really hard for them to manage their virtual classrooms and get subs who know what they're doing. And so that's one of my biggest concerns is if we start coming back and a lot of teachers start getting it, then that's I don't know what we would do as far as covering classes and helping making sure those kids continue to learn if that actually happens.
Thank you, Chad. Bill Brigman is on the call, and I'll turn this over to him because he's done extensive work in that area. I would just want to say, first of all, we would never want to bring people back knowing that we brought them back into conditions where that sort of widespread infection rate could occur. None of us has a crystal ball, none of us knows, but we would try to take every measure we could to safeguard against the kind of conditions you just described. Bill, if you still have connection, if you could talk about the work you've done with Kelly Services and the way you all are thinking about assigning substitutes, that might be really helpful.
Certainly. And thank you, Chad, for your question. You know, Kelly Educational Services provides our substitute teachers. So we've been working this summer with them, looking at different plans as to how we could open safely and provide subs. So the plan on the table right now, looking at sub usage by school over the last 2 years, is to actually assign permanent subs to a building. So those subs would actually be treated like a CCSD employee, the same safety type protocols, everything that's expected by our employees as well. We are also looking at, in case the school needed additional subs, a pool of subs by region or constituent district, where the subs could only sub in 2 to 3 schools within that region. So they would have to commit to that to be part of the pool. A principal certainly could make a decision not to pull in a sub from the pool, but the pool would be available. So there are about 1,000 subs right now in their database that are active, and they're of course actively surveying their staff to make sure that they're willing to come back and looking at the same data that we are. But I feel really comfortable and confident about having permanent subs assigned to schools, so they're just part of your community. So that's where we are right now. We're actually looking at cost of that. I think, and I shared some information with Don Kennedy, our CFO, earlier this week. It looked like it's basically fairly neutral based on sub usage that we have now. Of course, will depend on how we start on September the 8th. If it's virtual, we obviously would use very few subs, if any. Does that help?
So my follow-up question would be, do you think it would be a good idea to have them do the training from the 11th to the 18th as well, so they know what's going on virtually and how to navigate Canvas and all the platforms that we'll be using?
Sure, that's a good point. circle back to Carolyn Belcher on that as well. But that's a good idea. So they really would be part of your part of your school community.
Just on a note on that, make sure they will then need computers, even if they're in the building and we're doing a hybrid model at that point. One of the issues that we've had is that many times the subs don't have access to some of the things, that not only training, but that then need to be issued some kind of technology.
Thank you.
Dr. Meg Orchard here. I have horrible connection, so I just have one thing to add, a factor. From a lot of teachers, we're seeing, particularly teachers that work in maybe non-general ed classrooms, like a special area teacher, or even some of our alternative settings like Liberty Hill. I think those are the biggest questions I'm getting from teachers are in those sort of environments, which maybe are not so dominant in our discussions because they aren't in that sort of gen ed classroom. So perhaps we could add a bullet here for alternative settings or special area or ESOL, or those teachers that seem to have the biggest questions about what their role will look like in the upcoming year.
I think as well as like the safety options for them. I know a lot of special area teachers are worried about traveling from room to room and becoming, I've heard them say, super spreaders. So just again, to sort of think about how to address their concerns particularly.
Thank you. That's very helpful. We should mention too that the board revised or accepted as information the revised progressive discipline plan that would have to be modified for the kind of school start back that we would have. We simply could not. There are some things we cannot tolerate as patiently as we might have when we're trying to teach behaviors, but if children simply won't wear face masks, and that's what the protocol calls for, then we would very likely have to switch a child to a virtual setting. There are some kinds of student behaviors that we try to be very responsive toward and teach the behavior we want with a series of interventions. While that still will be important, when we start back, we do have a revised progressive discipline plan that will cover this time that we're in this very difficult period. It's not the same thing as addressing the concerns of some of the teachers you've mentioned who have daily physical contact with students. So I don't want to imply that, but we needed that separate category. I appreciate it was missing from our list, so thank you. These are good ideas. Anything else come to mind?
This is Jamie Costner. I'm a 7th grade math teacher. I'm very thankful that y'all are considering the teachers' comfort levels, but I would also maybe request that you reach out to like the bus drivers, cafeteria workers, because they also play a major role in us restarting face-to-face, and just to make sure that the kids are going to have transportation and the bus drivers are comfortable going back to work as well.
Thank you. That's a good reminder for the employees who actually work for Charleston County Schools. We contract with transportation, and we contract for building cleaning. Jeff, did you want to say anything about that would be more specific than my response?
Certainly, it's a great point. It is a great point, and we have been in constant contact with both organizations. As you're well aware, our nutrition services workers, for the most part, have not stopped working and have had themselves in harm's way in delivering food, and they have done a phenomenal job. We're at about a 1.5 million meal mark, delivering meals into the community and offering it at pickup sites. And they've really, the good thing about that, in addition to the great success, was that the comfort level of what they are doing has grown. They've had a couple of instances where workers have had to go out but we've really set it up to be able to provide backup. So if there is a worst case scenario in a cafeteria where we have to isolate an entire workforce, we have the ability to send another team in to run that show. And it's basically done by combining it with another school and reducing the lunch options at more than one school. Like 2 schools would pool together and reduce their menu options. So we've thought through a lot of things with that and have had plenty of conversations with the staff to make sure that they're comfortable. On that light, we have, I believe it's done, would be part of the back to school video to the point of making parents comfortable about what they're going to face. We've done the nutrition services portion of that video to show parents and our other workers how the food will be prepared, the protocols for the students picking up the food. That whole aspect of it is well underway. As Dr. Postlewaite mentioned, we've got a new bus contract for the majority of our transportation needs. First student is coming in, and a really good thing is that their driver counts are in really good shape for the start of the school year, which even if we've got a capacity issue, we've got a better driver issue that we faced last year as we closed out the last contract. So it's a point we'll continue to reinforce. I'm glad you brought it up, and we will be making sure that they have all the same information and we're taking their concerns into consideration.
Thank you. Any other ideas from those who've joined the call this morning? Perhaps you have some thoughts, suggestions, concerns that didn't fit into the discussion categories that we identified for you, but we want to make sure that we take this opportunity to hear from you before we work over the weekend to get the plan ready to take to the board. Most of what we've talked about still fits within the general plan that the board will be asked to approve. It's the implementation of it that becomes very complicated and requires this sort of careful consideration of multiple perspectives from everyone who has to work together to make this successful. So we want to hear from anyone who has joined the call who maybe have a thought or to share.
I have something to say. I'm Heather Burke. I'm a master reading teacher at Stono Park Elementary. And I was just wondering, earlier it was mentioned that if we can't go back full time, that we might be able to bring small groups of students back at different schools. And I was just wondering, some schools have a larger population of students that we might want to target for this small group instruction. And I was wondering if we thought about how to support those schools that may have a larger population of students than others that we would want to be there.
Yes, in general terms, yes. We have to see what the board approves on Monday. If we get permission to work on a sort of a case-by-case basis with those teachers who are comfortable coming back, once they are assured that what we've said we're going to put in place, we're putting in place, and we find out which parents are willing to allow their children to come back, then we will begin to take a look at the staffing, whether the staff at a school can support that or whether there's an opportunity to divide that among some other staff members as well as other facilities. But that is a level of detail that we've thought about it, but we haven't done any actual planning toward it because we don't know for sure what comfort level the board will have with allowing us to consider some of the specialized case-by-case scenarios, providing the medical community, the medical professionals with whom we're working, visit those sites and say that that's safe. So it's a great question. I think I'm on a Zoom call with your faculty Monday, so we could talk about that in more detail then. That's a very good question. Thank you. Anybody else?
And if I may add, Dr. Postlewaite, to Heather's statement, We also are working with infectious disease doctors at MUSC that are part of the MUSC Back to Business plan, making sure that when we do look at options such as bringing back small groups, that they are in agreement with that as well. So, and looking at all the risk stratifications for it. So it is something that we're looking at very closely along with our medical professionals like Dr. Posterwaite had mentioned.
Thank you. Those are actually the medical professionals I meant. I just didn't quite know how to talk about them the way that you did, Ellen. So thank you.
Well, and I do have another offering as well. We do have Dr. Katie Richardson on the line, and
Great.
she is willing to give us kind of an overview and an update of COVID from a DHEC perspective. Dr. Richardson?
Thanks, Ellen. So I just wanted to let you know that recent disease activity by county metrics, we do hope to update those every Monday. And so hopefully this coming Monday prior to the school board meeting, those metrics will be out. But in the meantime, Ellen asked if I could do some sort of back of the envelope calculations to see where we are. And don't hold me to these. What is printed will certainly be more specific. But we do look at 7-day rolling averages for cases in Charleston County. We had over 300 a day back in early July. That has now fallen to an average of around 200 a day. And so certainly we are heading in the right direction. But when I sort of take what the population of Charleston County is and look at that over a 2-week period, our sort of incidence rate may drop from 886 per 100,000, which is what it was with the last numbers that came out, to around 680,000. And so that's certainly in the right direction, but that still is around double what the rate would be to need to fall from that high incidence to a medium incidence. And so I don't know exactly if that's what it's going to look like, but that's my best guess. And then just looking at statewide percent positivity, I don't have by county in front of me, but statewide we've been sitting at around 20%. And that's certainly, if anything, the low country region has been a little higher than that. So I do not suspect that these new numbers on Monday will fall much below that number for Charleston County. But again, we'll see on Monday. I just wanted to sort of fill you in on what I could prior to those new numbers coming out.
Thank you for that. You all have been wonderful. We want to take this opportunity with folks on this call to thank you for everything you've done. The folks at DHEC and MUSC have bent over backwards to help us. We really appreciate, on top of everything else you're doing, you're taking time to do every single thing we've asked you for. So thank you so much.
We're happy to be involved. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Dr. Richardson. Other contributors before we close out the meeting? On the final slide then, if you have any additional thoughts, you can see our email addresses, I think, from the invitations that you receive. If anyone has ideas that they would like to submit, we are monitoring the comments, suggestions, strongly held viewpoints that are submitted to saferestart@Charleston, and then the rest of our email address. I will say from today's meeting, this has been very helpful. I have 6 takeaways on my to-do list. And I should acknowledge right now that there are several other district leaders on this call. As I will say, we had 6 takeaways for our to-do list. One is to get the communication from the principals to the schools. Just as soon as the board approves the plan and we can help formulate the key messages that principals then could customize, personalize for their school communities, and that needs to happen next week. The second is this idea of the virtual tour, the video. We know we're doing a district-wide. There are some principals who have really creative folks on staff who may be able to do a similar version for their own schools. Slides for Monday, we need to add the DHEC criteria so that everyone can see what the metrics are, as well as where we have stood on the various updates that have been added since the metrics were published. The fourth is that for the parent survey form, the parent enrollment form, parents need to know more about the protocols. They need to know a little more about the details of each option. They would appreciate knowing the possible calendar implications and some information about the grouping of students, the number of students who will be in a small group, and the extent to which we think we could hold on to that concept over time. Number 5, we need to think about training for substitutes who might need to fill in long-term, particularly if we're in a temporary remote mode. We need to make sure we have substitutes trained to use the learning management system Canvas, as well as the other software programs that will be in place. And 6, we need to think more carefully and talk more publicly about the sort of non-regular classroom teachers, those who are in alternative settings where they are exposed to fairly high-risk situations in normal school years, let alone this one, as well as the teachers who don't have an assigned homeroom or classroom, who are in various kinds of situations. So did I miss any key takeaways for us in terms of actions? If not, I'd like to thank you and then turn the meeting over to Reverend Mack and Mrs. Darby, our board chair and vice chair, to close us out this morning. Reverend Mack.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Postlewaite, and thank you to everyone that have engaged and participated in this long process. It has been difficult trying to put together a plan, but with all of your thoughts and insights and input, we feel that we have a working model that we can move forward with, and we could not have done it without the participation from everyone, from every sector across the board. And I just can't begin to echo over and over again how appreciative we are of all of the inputs from our parents, from our teachers, from DHEC, MUSC, to our staff who have worked tirelessly trying to put together a model that will be workable and safe for everyone. Again, thank you for your participation, and we look forward to moving together in a safe manner to make sure that we have a working and a viable solution to educating our kids this school year.
Thank you. Ms. Darby?
I just will echo what Reverend Mack says, and also I just want to say I'm just unbelievably proud of the work that all of our CCSD team is doing. Teachers, nurses, leadership. It's just, I compare to what I hear from people in the community whose children don't go to CCSD, and y'all are just doing amazing work. I know you haven't had any free time since March, and I just really appreciate it. And I think we've got a good plan, and recognize certainly that things could change tomorrow, and they probably will, but we have a plan in place to address that. So thank y'all, all parents who participated, the medical experts. It's just amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank all of you again. And for those who may be watching this video now or will tune in later, we want to thank our larger community for the very courteous, for the most part, way in which people have weighed in with very strong feelings from multiple perspectives, and in the most genuine sense. The decision about when we can open schools belongs to the community. It is a responsibility of the community. The sooner the COVID infection rates come down, the more safely we can open schools. So please encourage everyone to wear masks, to take care of personal hygiene. Just remember to wash hands frequently and to social distance whenever it's possible so that we can get children back in school. They need to be with their teachers and their teachers want to be with them. So thank you again for all of your contributions and stay tuned for Monday's meeting. If you feel we need to have another one of these get-togethers, just reach out and we'd be happy to do that. You've been very generous with your time. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.